Hi, you're listening to Record of Change. My name is Stephanie Raible, and I'm your host for this episode. Record of Change features the stories of individuals from across the world about how their lives are being shaped by the COVID-19 pandemic. We listen to our interviewees at several points in time because we want to follow their stories of how their lives are changing. This season, we will feature a mixture of some new and familiar voices and stories. Today, I'm speaking to our first interviewee who has received the vaccine, which makes me feel hopeful. We will hear from Katherine Kortum in her first interview with Record of Change. Katherine is a transportation engineer in Washington, D.C. In 2020, she also began working at the D.C. Department of Health to help lead public COVID-19 testing sites, where she has also seen the district's peaks of the virus through her work and was only a few blocks away from what took place on January 6th. Katherine and I have been good friends for the past almost 6 years now, and I've been keeping up with her story of working at a COVID-19 testing site since she started back there in June. I've heard many of her stories from the front line, and I'm honored that she was willing to share them with us today. Hey, Katherine, thank you for joining today.
Thanks. Good to talk to you.
Can you tell me a little bit about the earliest days of the pandemic for you? When did you first notice COVID-19 in your life, and when did it start actually impacting you?
In about the middle of February, the organization that I worked for holds a lot of meetings. So we're always bringing people in, and people are traveling to us, and we're meeting in groups in person without masks, which now sounds absolutely bonkers that we used to do that. And they started to make announcements and to post signs all over the place that we needed to be washing our hands more, because that was the first that I heard about it here in DC, at least, was that it was a hand washing issue. We needed to make sure to use hand sanitizer, wash our hands, and everything was going to be fine. So at the office, people were posting 20-second songs that you could sing while washing your hands on the mirrors. And hand sanitizer started appearing in every room, giant jugs of it, at the same time that it became almost impossible to find hand sanitizer in stores. So we were all hand sanitizing like crazy. We had very dry hands, and we sort of thought that was going to be the end of it. I had a couple of meetings at the in-person meetings that I led at the end of February, and we sort of joked about, gee, maybe we shouldn't be holding these. I remember when one of the people who was attending a meeting was from San Francisco, which somebody had been found in San Francisco to have COVID-19, or at least have the coronavirus. And so we thought, oh, maybe we shouldn't have invited her. Maybe she shouldn't have come, but it was fine. We held our meeting, and it was mostly a joke at that point. I mean, a fairly serious joke, but we weren't taking it all that seriously. We didn't think it was certainly going to become what it has become. And the day that I think of as the Tom Hanks Day is the day that it became very clear to me that this was going to be something. So that was Wednesday, March 11th, when several things happened over the course of that evening. Tom Hanks announced that he had tested positive. The NBA ended their season or stopped in-person games. And I believe that was also the day that we closed down flights, the international flights, as effective as that may or may not have been. And my last day in the office was March 13th. I remember packing up my office to take things home on March 13th and trying to think about what I would need for the next couple of weeks, assuming that I'd be back. I figured I might be gone through April, but I figured I'd be back in late April at the latest. May seemed like a certainty. We'd be back in the office by then. So just a couple of weeks worth of stuff. I took it all home. We also held an in-person meeting. It wasn't one of my meetings, but my coworkers held one of their meetings on Friday, March 13th. Several people did not end up coming in person. Several people attended virtually to that. So we always had food at our meetings, and there was a lot of leftover food because there were fewer people there in person. So I remember going home with a lot of leftover bagels and sandwiches and other things that we had catered. Then I went home and I didn't leave my house again, it seemed, for quite some time.
You started working at a COVID-19 testing site in downtown DC. What motivated you to do that? Can you tell me a little bit about the logic of why you decided to do something like that?
Yes, I did start working there, although not immediately. During the first couple of weeks were particularly challenging for me because I was taking this very seriously. I grew up Catholic, following all the rules. There's a lot of guilt, so we do what we're told. And we were told to stay inside, so I stayed inside. And I didn't go anywhere. I didn't do anything. And to have such a major drop off in your life from a fairly normal life to nothing. One of the drop offs that I remember most potently was that there were several races that I was going to run, road races this spring, and they were canceled at the last minute. So I'd been training for 10 milers and half marathons and been doing the long runs. So been running 15 plus miles in order to get ready for them, only for the races themselves to not happen. And instead, now I'm doing nothing but wandering circles in my little apartment in central DC. So it was a struggle. It was a big mental struggle to stay inside, but that was what I was told to do. So I did. And in the meantime, I was looking for any way to feel useful because it seemed like the world was falling apart very suddenly and very thoroughly. And I was trying to find anything I could do while I sat around in my apartment to feel at all useful. And I don't remember how I came across it, but DC, and I believe many other states, if not all, has a medical reserve corps that anyone can sign up for. They certainly are looking for people with health backgrounds, but they're also happy to take anybody who does not have a health background. I'm an engineer. I have no health background, but I signed up for it figuring it's something. And so the first time that I got a call to volunteer with this medical reserve corps at one of the nearby testing sites was in June, the first time that I was available to go. So I went in June, having absolutely no idea what to expect. That day itself made a world of difference to me because I had somewhere to go that was outside of my apartment, and I had something to do that felt useful, immediately, tangibly useful, and I was around other human beings. Now, we were wearing full PPE, so we all looked a little bit like cyborgs, and I was not at that point used to wearing full PPE, so it felt very awkward and uncomfortable. But nonetheless, there were other humans in 3 dimensions around me. And that alone was enough to make me want to keep doing it.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that first day? When you were doing all of this, what types of things did you learn? What did you guys do? And were you expecting to sign up for as many days a week as you ended up doing?
No, I was not. I figured this would be a 1 or 2 day a week thing. There's a lot of people on a testing site on any given day. Some people have a health background, and those who do are generally nurses. There's also a lot of PCTs is the term we use. And for the life of me, I can't remember what it stands for. Primary care technician, perhaps. So people who aren't full nurses, but have a health background to some degree. And then a lot of us who are volunteers or have come to the site just because we wanted to do something useful, even if we don't have a health or public health background. So the nurses, the ones with RNs, were doing the actual swabbing of all of the patients. They were the ones who were the most up close and personal with each patient. But the rest of us were registering people. We were shepherding them through the site. We were assembling test kits. We were calming a lot of nerves, explaining the process to people. We were sorting the test kits once they were complete to make sure that everything was squared away in terms of our tracking logs. So most of the things that need to be done on the site don't require a health background at all. They just require somebody to be moderately detail-oriented and keep track of things. And that's something I'm good at, even if I don't have a medical degree. So I started doing it about once or twice a week, and then it just kept ramping up as I realized the completely selfish benefits of being around other people for me. Having somewhere to go many days made a big difference to me. So I kept going. And I have been at least 3 days a week, sometimes 5 days a week, pretty much since about September. So it's now my second job.
I think that it should be, 7 months that you've worked there now?
I think that's, yes, 7 or 8, yeah.
Oh, gosh. What are some of your most memorable experiences from there? What stands out from you from that time?
Well, there are lots of things, but one that is quite recent is that the testing site that I spend the most time at is in very central DC and in an area that was surrounded by those who came for the January 6th rally. We'll call it a rally. So that was an interesting day. And our testing site was up and running, and it's an outdoor site. So we're all out on the street. There's one block of the city that is blocked off and is ours for doing all the testing. But people walk by all the time. And in normal times, when the city isn't shut down, people drive by. And that day, there were a lot of people that aren't normally in DC who were walking by. Not a lot of masks, a different look than the usual person who is walking by our site. A lot of flags, some American, some Trump, some the thin blue line flags, lots of things. People carrying things that I don't often see people carrying 2x4s down the street, but I saw a surprising amount of that day. Knowing that it was going to be perhaps an abnormal day, a few of us on the site decided that we were going to arrange ourselves such that those of us who were the most front-facing, the ones who were manning the registration site right along where everybody was walking, we were white, and we decided that we were going to be the ones who were the most front-facing. We put all the staffers and volunteers of color further back. Just we didn't know if there were going to be any problems, but we decided we didn't want the chance. So that was an uncomfortable day, and our site closed. It closes early afternoon anyway. And so it closed and we were walking home at right about the time that the Capitol was being breached, which we didn't know at the time. We got home to find out. And that was startling to know that our site, which was only a few blocks from the Capitol, that so many of the people we had seen walking by that had said things, both positive and negative to us, were potentially at the Capitol and maybe now in the Capitol. That was a memorable day. I was glad to get home that day and then stay home. But we've had a lot of other days that are somewhat memorable as well. Shortly before the Thanksgiving holidays, in particular, we had a volume that was unlike anything we had seen before. The number of people coming to get tested, I assume prior to travel or prior to any family gatherings, was off the charts. And that, in a way, was fun, just trying to handle those sheer volumes and make changes on the fly to make things efficient and add people and add stations throughout the process on the fly, just trying to make it work with that many people coming through. We felt like we were absolutely exhausted by the end of those days, but it felt very valuable. I realized that a negative test doesn't guarantee anything, but I was glad to have helped as many people as we could come through those days so that I presume many of them went and visited family.
So many people during this time have been avoiding in-person interactions. What has the value been for you of doing this in-person role, and what have been your personal do's and don'ts and boundaries to stay safe throughout this time?
As somebody who lives alone and has always considered herself an introvert, this has been quite a challenging year for me. I thought I liked being alone, but it turns out when I am nothing but alone, getting to be around other human beings, both those on the site who have become friends because I see them, all of the patients who come through, it has just done wonders for my psyche. However, every time I'm on that site, every time we are there, we are in full PPE. And I consider the N95 to be the holy grail of what we need to be wearing. We wear gowns, we wear gloves, we wear N95s, we wear surgical masks. On top of that, we wear visors. Some wear goggles. There's a whole array of things that we are wearing. While in full PPE, I do feel reasonably confident. Even prior to COVID, people wore this daily in medical facilities. And when there's enough of it, those wearing it don't get sick. And that has given me a great deal of confidence. We were fitted for our N95 so that we're sure that they fit appropriately. And I now feel quite a bit of confidence when I'm walking around wearing the full PPE. If that weren't available to us, there's no way I would be doing this. Even just walking around on the sidewalk, I'm always double masking just in regular life, even when I'm not on the testing site.
Did you guys ever experience any of the PPE shortage? I have been hearing about that on the news, especially in the earliest days. Did you guys ever experience any days that you had to reuse PPE or anything like that?
We never had to. We were encouraged to some of the items. I know that some of the items, especially over the early summer, were quite expensive. I know that the cost of a gown, for example, was pretty high compared to what it would have normally been. So we have been encouraged to reuse some of our PPE, particularly the face shields. Those are the easiest to do because those are plastic. We can wipe those down with sanitizing wipes and reuse those multiple times until they become too scratched or foggy to see out of, really. But the masks and the gowns, we never ran out of them, but we were encouraged to be careful with them.
What has it been like to balance this new role that you've taken on during COVID with all of your existing responsibilities? Because you are someone that is fortunate enough to have full-time remote work. How has that balancing act been for you?
It works better some days than others, as I'm sure is true for everybody. The site that I spend the most time at is open in the mornings until early afternoon. So I tend to get up early. I will check my career work email, address anything quick and urgent there, and then head off to the site for much of the morning. And then come home and sit down at my computer and do I hesitate to call it my real job because that would indicate that other such jobs aren't real, but the job for which all of my education has trained me. So I just start working early afternoon when I get home. And so I put in my 8 hours that go well into the evening. I just am essentially doing a double shift, which most of the time works fine. It makes for long days, but it keeps me occupied. And I have discovered, not that this is a new discovery, but that I do not handle boredom well. So having multiple things to do has been helpful, especially having one job that is more physical. When you walk away from the COVID testing site, you don't have to continue doing or thinking about it. Now, you do think about it because it's hard not to think about COVID these days, but it is very much an on the ground kind of a job as compared to a much more cerebral type of job that I have that is my primary paycheck. So it's nice to have the complement of the two jobs right now, to be honest.
In your regular day-to-day work that you're doing, what have some of the biggest challenges been? Because to my understanding, you did a lot of in-person events, a bit of travel, and that was the model that you guys had in terms of bringing people together to have dialogue. What has shifted in your day-to-day work, and what have some of the hot topics been, and how have they shifted?
Well, like everybody else, we've definitely gone virtual. The National Academy of Sciences, much of what we do is bring committees of experts together to provide recommendations on all kinds of different topics and provide those recommendations to Congress or various administrations in the government that need that advice. We're always holding meetings of bigwigs from around whatever the industry is, are always coming to DC to meet with us. And having to take all of that virtual has been a challenge. Hosting meetings virtually is just a different skill set than hosting meetings in person. Our travel costs have gone way down, as have our food costs. So there's at least been that going for us. We've been able to hold our meetings much more quickly than we ever could before. When we were always holding 2-day in-person meetings, you'd be lucky to hold a meeting every quarter because you had 12 to 15 high-ranking people whose schedules you'd have to coordinate, and getting everybody to the same city for an extended period of time when people would be flying across the country was a trick. But now that you can hold half-day meetings every couple of weeks, in some ways get our projects done much faster. So it's helpful for some of these particularly dynamic topics. I work on some in the transportation world, and certainly the National Academies has done a whole lot that is COVID related, because the National Academy of Medicine is one of our academies. And there's been a lot of focus on this last year on the speed with which we can get results out. So in some ways, it has been helpful to be able to have speedier virtual meetings. Although there's no question that there's a difference in the quality of interaction virtually than in person.
In thinking about some of the hot topics and how things have shifted within your industry, what are some of your hopes for the future? What do you hope that either when it comes to the day-to-day functioning of the office or when it comes to the specific topics that you work with, are there any hopes in the post-COVID world that you have?
I have so many hopes. I'm in transportation, and so I have been keenly aware of the effects of reduced ridership and fear of other people that has affected the transportation industry. Certainly the airline industry, but the industry that most of us are most concerned about is transit. Transit ridership is way down. Transit was already suffering from underfunding in most situations. This is not going to help. So my hopes are that this moment when we clearly have to do some rethinking, and we are clearly seeing an advantage to having some redundancy, more redundancy in the transportation system, to have other ways of getting around than just the one, that we will be able to use this time when we are obviously having to rethink a lot of operational procedures and a lot of future planning to better prioritize transit. and transit in coordination with all of these new shared modes that are out there, whether they're Uber and Lyft or the scooters or bikes, et cetera. There are ways to make all of these systems work together better than they have in the past. And this COVID change is one major hurdle that we're going to have to get past, one pivot point, to use one of the trendy terms now. There's also the fact that we, as of now, have a brand new administration. We are about to have a new Secretary of Transportation and a new Department of Transportation with different priorities. And my hope is that the combination of this COVID forced shift plus a new administration is going to mean that the priorities going forward are different than they have been in the past. They're less focused on single occupancy vehicles and more focused on other ways to get around.
As a resident of Central DC, you probably feel politics much more than most of us do in the States. What have these last months been, especially the final times of the Trump administration and these first few days of the Biden administration?
DC is a city that has always hated Trump. 95% of people voted against him in both elections. He and his administration have never been popular here. In the last several weeks in particular, I live at a point where I was right on the edge of the green zone, as Secret Service was calling it. So were I to walk south toward the mall, toward the Capitol, I would be blocked in a lot of directions and encounter lots and lots of National Guard and Humvees and Jersey barriers and such. But if I walk north into the more residential areas, it was almost like things were normal. It was quiet, but there was no sign of the militarized zone that was present just the other direction of me. So it's been jarring to live right on the edge of seemingly two different worlds, one that seems normal and one that is anything but normal.
Out of curiosity, is that normal for a presidential shift in terms of the level of security, or is this a bit different this year?
It was different this year. The mall often sees quite a bit of security. And because there's usually a parade essentially down Pennsylvania Avenue, there's a lot of security there. There's a fair amount of security around the Capitol and the mall and the usual spots, but it expanded way beyond what it ever had before this year, thanks to the events of January 6th. We don't normally have 25,000 National Guard just standing on the streets. There aren't normally this many Jersey barriers. There's normally a different feel in the city, but it's usually celebratory because for DC, hundreds of thousands of people sometimes come in for inauguration. And that is boom time for the restaurants, for the shops, for so many of the places here that do very brisk business happily during an inauguration. And they were all shut down this year. In-person dining was closed, and any of the restaurants that were within the green zone could barely operate.
There are still some concerns about the vaccine in terms of the public opinion about things. Through your role at the testing site, you were able to get your first dose of the vaccine, and your second dose will actually come within days of this recording. When did you first realize that you would be eligible to receive it, and what was your reaction?
In December, I realized that I was probably qualified as a frontline health worker who would be likely to get it. I hadn't heard anything specific, so I reached out to the person who runs our site, who said, yes, we are getting it. Toward the end of December, DC opened up registration for vaccines for those who were healthcare workers. I'm not a traditional healthcare worker who has a medical diploma to show anybody, but I qualified. And so I made my appointment at the end of December, and I was very anxious to do so. I know that there's a lot of concern. I know there's a lot of vaccine hesitancy out there. I'm sure part of it is that I work alongside the National Academy of Medicine, and I am aware of much of the science that has gone into these vaccines. I am not the type of scientist who can develop a vaccine myself, but I know a lot of people who can. I trust the science. And I wanted to be able to do things like visit my parents without being frozen in terror that I was going to bring them this virus, even if I were asymptomatic, and wind up killing them or wind up being a link in a chain that led to the death of somebody else. Knowing that I do come in contact with COVID positive people every day. I mean, I'm wearing full PPE, but it gives me a huge sense of relief. I'm still several weeks away from feeling any degree of confidence that I have a level of protection because I haven't gotten my second shot yet. And then I'm going to give it several weeks before I consider the booster to have been effective. But there's a deep, deep sense of relief. Even more than my own sense of relief at getting the vaccine, though, my parents, as of yesterday, have their appointments. My parents are both over 65, and we have all been scouring every website we can find, refreshing things constantly. And so they will be vaccinated next week with their first shots. And that is a bigger sense of relief to me than my own vaccination.
We'll be checking in with you in a few weeks. What are your hopes for the next coming months within your own life?
Oh, I have so many. I look forward to being able to see friends in person again, outdoors for the foreseeable future, but be able to see them without being so worried. Be able to give a friend a quick hug without fearing that one of us is going to cause immense damage to the other in that process. I look forward to visiting my parents while feeling that I am not putting them in danger for doing so. I look forward to visiting my sister. My sister has gotten a pandemic puppy. She's one of those. But I have not met this puppy, which is now becoming quite full-sized because I would have to fly to see her, and that has not been possible. I look forward to feeling like I am safe in a gym again. Prior to this, I ran frequently, and I have since been running outside, but it's cold out. And I would like to feel that I can access an indoor gym and treadmills again. I look forward to eventually meeting friends in restaurants, or at least outdoor restaurant patios. Mostly it's people. As enough people either become vaccinated or have had COVID that we can feel reasonably safe encountering each other. I can't wait for seeing people to become normal again instead of a special event.
Yeah. I can completely understand that. Katherine, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing your story.
Thank you. It's always good to talk to you, Stephanie.
This was episode 4 of our 3rd season of Record of Change, featuring guest Katherine Kortum of Washington, D.C. If you like this episode, or Record of Change in general, we would love to hear your feedback, and even more so if you'd like to share it with your networks. Follow us on your favorite podcast provider, or on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, or our website Record of Change. If you like supporting independent podcasts, we would be honored for you to support our efforts to bring you unique stories from across the world through being a Patreon supporter. For those supporting us on Patreon, you'll have unique opportunities and access. Getting early access to episodes, bonus behind-the-scenes insights from the Record of Change team, and the opportunity to pitch questions for our interviewees, alongside us helping us make the show. Even the smallest level of support can be a great boost as we strive to document the impact of COVID-19 on communities throughout the world. This podcast is implemented with and by the members of the Bosch Alumni Network, a community that brings together former and current fellows, grantees, and staff members of the Robert Bosch Stiftung and its partners. Thank you for listening.